team. Welcome to episode 115 of Transition Talk, where we talk about dental transitions and how to navigate the sometimes messy path to practice ownership. If you're a doctor who's been presented with a partnership opportunity, or perhaps an offer is coming soon, you may be wondering what your next steps are. This episode, and the one previous, is here to lead you in the right direction. So if you listen to episode 114, this is a continuation. If you haven't listened, stop, go back, listen again, and we'll see you in a minute. We highly recommend you do so. In episode 114, we talked about the top questions to ask the seller and how to understand the answers before jumping straight into a partnership. In today's episode, we're going to dive a little deeper and discuss the preparation needed from you to know when is the right career move and personal step to enter into a partnership, and what do you need to do to analyze the opportunity. But before we do so, hello, Mr. Loretto.
Hello, Miss Ratcliffe. It was so good last time. It's like a continuation.
I know.
It's like a cliffhanger that you don't have to wait the whole season. You don't have to wait the Yellowstone. What are we talking about? Over a year now?
I love that your dedication to compare this podcast to Yellowstone.
It's the same.
Those people that are listening are like, I have been up all night waiting for Wake Up Wednesday and 115 to come out.
100%. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I agree. It was a good episode and a good continuation of the first partnership episode we did way back. And so I'm excited to dive in here.
You know, when I watch Yellowstone, I realize I'm such a city boy. I'm not a man. If the definition of a man is to be anything like Yellowstone, here's my man card. I'm just not that guy.
Rough and rugged.
If I'm on a horse, it's a guided horse. You know what I mean? It's a fishing trip. We're not going to go very far. Someone's going to bait the hook for me.
We're going to glamp.
Yeah.
Yeah, glamping. Me too.
Well, I'm looking forward to this. Obviously, we had so much content last episode, and we've got good stuff here today. So let's get going.
Let's do it. So, I think first and foremost, we always say, what is your why and your how? And in this situation, I think if you were considering a partnership or one's been put in front of you, or maybe you don't know and you're kind of looking at all the options of ownership and thinking which one might be a best fit, first step is preparing yourself, right? And when I say that, there's a lot of different ways you can prepare yourself. So I want to talk about that first. So if you're talking to a young grad or a young associate who's thinking about ownership, what are you talking about when you're preparing yourself for a partnership?
Yeah, so this is obviously a very, very common question. A lot of my Texas Tech University students, they really are trying to struggle with what they're doing. They're heading into their fourth year. Do we work at corporate? Do you work at a private practice? What is it going to lead to? So it's an important conversation. I love just kind of starting off and try to figure out what you're going to do. To me, I think first we just need to mentally prepare of what our plans are, mentally prepare that, hey, if I'm going to do a partnership, it just means I'm going to be with somebody probably 5+ years. I want to work in a root practice where I'm a controlling partner or equal partner to somebody else. So I think emotionally you have to be, that's a situation you want to be. I think clinically is super important. You need to focus on your clinical skills to get your speed up so that you can match what that established doctor is doing. If they're doing $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 of restorative work and you've been doing 30 or 40, we got to get your clinical speed up. We got to get your finances in order to be able to borrow money. And we'll spend some more time on the financial piece, but we need to save some money and save some cash. Remember kind of your Why You Must Own lecture. This is not about getting out of debt, but building some cash so that you're going to be prepared for the acquisition. Certainly, we want you to market yourself to the area that you want to be a partner in. Obviously, location is very, very important to me. I think that that's a joint decision between you and your spouse, and finding that location is certainly important. So it's a combination, you're trying to dig into the where and the why, and then market yourself to these right practices. And then we'll talk about just once you find what those next steps are.
Yeah, to add on that, if you aren't sure if a individual practice or a partnership, I think you have to take a step back and think about what are my values? What are my goals? Take a really hard look at yourself and your personality and say, am I someone who can play well in the sandbox? If I'm on a team project, am I the person that's taking the lead, or do I like to have a cohort that's going to take the lead with me and we're going to kind of figure out who's best at what? I talk to people all the time that say, I am not built for a partnership. And I think that is a very okay, not shameful thing to say. You have to know who you are, because a bad partnership, just like a bad marriage, is a bad thing. You don't want to get into those. So if you know yourself personally that right now where you are today is not a partnership material, well then listen to that, right? You can still explore and talk to people, because who knows, maybe you meet the other person who is the yin to your yang and you guys can work really well together and it surprises you. But I think it's okay to understand who you are and make decisions, and don't force yourself into the box of, well, I hear partnerships are better because X, Y, or Z. Don't do it if it's not going to be a good fit for you.
Yeah, I mean, the practice needs to support you and all these other things, but I'm telling you, just like what you said, is there needs to be this massive, wild connection between the two of you. I mean, or three of you. There could be two owners and you being the new person in, but it just needs to feel, again, like you're lucky. They feel like they're lucky to have found you. And if you're not feeling that, I'm telling you, it's not there. It's just something
Yeah.
where when we talk to owner doctors and young associates that are finding these kind of amazing opportunities, you just can sense early on in the conversation that it's right. We can make the numbers work, what percent they buy in and when the value and all these other things, we can work around that, but just finding that right person is key. So yeah, I like it.
Next thing, and you touched on this, is financially. Clearly, like we can all love each other and it can be the great opportunity, but financially you have to be able to buy in and that practice has to be able to support you. And we have seen, unfortunately, a number of people who have been ready to own and unfortunately their financial situation does not allow them to do so in the timing they want to, right? And so from a personal liquidity standpoint, savings, your credit history, talk a little bit about that.
So yeah, multiple conversations, lectures on this, episodes on the importance of financing. So the general rule is you'll need about, let's just go high level again, evaluation. The practice does $1 million. Valuation probably is going to come in around, let's just say as an example, 80% of collections, 800,000. If you were to purchase that, you're going to need about 6 to 7% of that. So roughly 50 plus, 60 plus $1,000 saved to buy 100% of that $800,000 price tag on the $1 million practice. If the business was valued at 1.6, you're buying in half. The same metrics is kicking in. The bank wants to see liquidity. Now, one thing to consider here when you're going to go into a partnership, and this is the expectations that we have to have set for my senior doctor and for you. The senior doctor may have some debt. He or she may carry $300,000 to $400,000 of old debt, but it could be at a very low interest rate with Bank of America at 3% or provider, whoever else. And so when you buy into that practice in a partnership, typically the bank is going to want to refinance everything. But at the time of this recording, in 24, we have interest rates that are, somewhere in the 6+%. So now this causes a little emotion for my senior doctor because they had a 3%. Now it's got to maybe refinance at 6. So it's just something, it's a hurdle that we have to overcome. And again, these are hurdles we can't overcome once I've got that love and established relationships with the two. It's just something I don't want you and them to find out at year 2 into this dating and then go to marriage. I want us to discuss that early on how that's going to work, as well as the building. Can you afford the building? Your mind, you're thinking I'm going to be a partner. I'm buying half the practice. Sure, I'm going to be buying half the building. But the reality is the lending for the building is not the same. They're not going to give you 100%. So we got to get your head wrapped around that maybe you're just going to be a tenant of this building because you don't have the liquidity to buy into both at the same time.
Yeah. And if you're a seller listening to this, I mean, that's something really, really important to think about. I don't know what it is with the time that we're recording this podcast, but have seen lots of expansions and new offices and things that they're basically taking on. The sellers are taking on debt with then the thought of bringing in someone else and not understanding how those two things are going to conflict, right? Like, so understanding the timing and kind of, again, just having a plan and kind of thinking proactively and not just making kind of a rash decision to buy the new thing right now. Wait, if you're going to bring someone on, let's talk about that, right? Talk to your advisor, talk to a transition team, understand so that your expectations are clear going in on what financially you're going to have to do to bring that other person in, right? Because now you're a partnership, you're working together, your debt, their debt, like it's all based on this practice working, right? And so those things have to work together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you mentioned this. I think this is important. Regardless of what type of ownership you want, if you know where you want to go and you don't have an opportunity, there are lots of ways to look for them, right? But in our experience, going to a broker site like ours or somewhere else is not necessarily the best way to find someone from a partnership perspective, right? If you are very targeted in what you're looking for, selling yourself and being proactive and reaching out to people who may not even be listed and kind of trying to find someone is a way to find a good opportunity. And many of our clients have found that. It's the envelope method and it's episode 2, how to find a practice. But let's talk about it in particular about a partnership.
So again, one of the things I'm loving is like the Nancy Drew episode I always refer back to. So being able to look and profile the doctor that may be looking for an associate. That's where you're going on the website. You can see they have 6, 7, 8 employees. That typically is going to dictate they're probably doing $1 million, $4 million, $5 million of collections. So listen to that Nancy Drew episode as a tool so you can learn how to calculate what these collections are just based on employees. So that's a indicator of just to be able to see. And that's how you can know how to market yourself maybe be more aggressive to this, but you're certainly shedding that message into the local study clubs in that area, maybe the periodontist that is overseeing the SPEAR, Seattle Study Club, how to use an associate, maybe do a one-time, join the meeting to listen to a certain topic, to introduce yourself. Certainly the Benko Shine Patterson reps, let everyone know that this is something of interest. But what I want to focus on next is you need to know kind of where you are in this kind of driver's seat, passenger seat, back seat, or out of the car. If you're the driver, it's because you've got 4 or 5 year clinical experience. I spoke recently to someone who was working at Heartland, and she had unbelievable experience, and she was doing well over $100,000 a month. Actually, it was a number north of that. So for her, she's a great candidate. If she's going to go work as a partner for somebody, this needs to be a dynamic practice. This needs to be $1 million+ practice with lots of new patients, with a senior doctor, financially set, and be willing to kind of cut back, plenty of space for her to kind of jump in and just drive. If you're a 25-year-old UOP grad that just finished and did 5 crowns, and I have no idea how many crowns that a UOP grad would do, maybe 20 or 30, I don't know. But the point is that if you have not had that experience, then I've got lesser expectations for the seller and for you because you don't have that clinical experience yet, and therefore you don't have that demand. I'd put you maybe in the backseat or out of the car where we don't have to be as demanding and forceful as what type of practice. So it's important for you to market yourself, and it's important yourself to get ready from an interview perspective to really understand what practices can support you, including your goals to be an owner, especially for that doctor that maybe has been out 3, 4, 5 years and doesn't want to be the associate for a couple of years prior to partnership.
Yeah. And I think looking at what you can bring to the table and just kind of coming up those, whether it's you're super experienced and are in the driver's seat, but even also like, what can I bring to this partnership that maybe is something they don't have, right? Like maybe you speak another language, maybe it's 3 men and you're a woman and you have connections to mom groups and it's an ortho practice or, pediatric practice. So regardless of what it is, look at what you have. Maybe you're really great at accounting and people management and currently they're weak in that, right? Like you can say that in a nice way, but you can say, this is what I would bring to the table. This is kind of how I could feel I could contribute. Because again, like we said in episode 114, if you want to become a partner, you have to contribute in some way and like show your value. And that's what is going to make someone want to say like, oh, heck yeah, I want to bring that person on because not only are they clinically strong, but they bring this other aspect to the table that, maybe we don't have or another voice that we can utilize. So I think understanding your strengths, understanding your weaknesses, which is just as important as understanding your strengths, and then being able to kind of talk about those in a way that is not braggadocious, but just kind of a, hey, this is my value and this is what I feel like I can add to your
Well, I think,
enterprise.
and I love that. So like either A, you have clinical skills that for a fact that you're bringing to that. That could be an implant, it could be extractions, it could be endo, whatever it is. If that is the case, then certainly you're marketing that to add value to the practice. If you're the 26, 27-year-old that just got out of dental school, then maybe your added value is let me check hygiene and to allow you to free yourself up to spend more time with quality new patients or more time doing any operative work to allow you to do that. And then my commitment is being the mentoree of this practice and to push myself clinically with the next 2 years of courses. And on top of that, it's going to be the courses that I'm looking at this practice and that we're referring out. I think I can add that from a value perspective back. So it's just that ability. Look at your weakness and turn it into a strength, or look at your strength and market it and basically say, look at me.
Yeah. I mean, which is a skill you're going to have to hone and develop over the course of ownership and just being clinician to your patients, right? So it's all just kind of trying to make yourself stronger as an individual. Okay. So we touched on this in the other episode from a seller perspective and also just understanding like what does the seller put together, kind of what do they know, like how prepared are they in this kind of creation of a partnership or what are they already doing if they're in a partnership. But one of the ways you can prepare is understanding the seller's vision by having conversations, right? So like what we're talking about in you preparing and then also talking to the seller, it's almost like the gathering of just basic information. Like, are we going to be a fit? Am I ready for this partnership? And understanding the seller, if you are lucky enough to already have an opportunity or know someone who might give you an opportunity, understanding their vision is important, right?
Yeah. So what's different in our last episode is, if there was a 4-chair practice and senior doctor wanted to stay on for a year, it's going to be crowded. But we can kind of work around that for a year. Mm-hmm. We can do some expanded hours. We can do an expanded day here or there. We can work on just some single doctor scheduling. It's going to be painful, but we can get around it. But in a partnership, it literally is there's going to be two of us pretty much full time or three, whatever the number is, full time. So I've got to have space. So that space is absolutely critical. So for my senior doctor or my associate, it's one of the first things I ask. I want to know about the chairs. Do we have 6, 7 chairs? How many hygienists do you have? The question you need to ask yourself, associate doctor, is there going to be 2 chairs for me, period, at all times? Not 3 chairs that me and this doctor share, 2 chairs for me. That's going to be critical for you. So I love just space is critical. I want to see the team. Oh, we just don't have any employees. Can't find any hygiene. Okay. Well, that's kind of a leadership problem and not necessarily blame it on COVID. We're 4 years in, guys. It's 4 years in. You have to be able to change mentality. You can go and market, have a good culture. We need a good team. We need good space. We need for a partnership. We need good new patient flow, 30, 40, 50 new patients. We need to ideally take a look inside where the procedures, either again, you're the student that just graduated or the 5-year Heartland gal out that's doing all these cases, then let's take that strategy and move in. What marketing are we going to do different? How's it going to be different? What's the plan of creating this partnership when that's going to happen? So to me, it's listening to that vision, listening to those clinical goals. Do they have the space and the operational team around them to make this thing successful? Are they on board?
Yeah.
Is this something that they're talking about? Not just your standard, hey, bring in an associate, pay your percentage, but this is truly, I am committed to your success. I'm committed to making you a partner. I'm committed to attending these courses. I'm committed to buying the technology that you recommend. You're looking for that type of a commitment from our doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you've had these conversations, if you feel as though seller's prepared, you're prepared, like you're kind of both on the same page, at some point you have to get past the high level and kind of global view, and you kind of have to get down to the nitty gritty of like, is the practice ready and what is the actual plan? And that's where due diligence comes into play, right? It's important that this piece of it come early enough in the process that you are not so talked out, but also important that you wait a certain amount of time, right? It's a delicate balance of like when you ask for financials, when you do that, right? We have a whole episode about how to ask for the financials. The Nancy Drew episode that you mentioned can give you kind of an understanding high level. But at a certain point, if a seller is serious about bringing on a partner, they have to also be transparent enough to share financials and information, right? And that's the due diligence. When we talk to clients, because remember, we offer that complimentary overview, that first call where you send us information in, and much like an x-ray shows you what's going on underneath, those financials and production reports show us what the practice is and if it's ready for a partnership or what it needs to be ready for a partnership, right? And so we have a list of documents, but before I kind of dive in there, anything you want to add on that, just kind of high level
No,
topic?
I mean, that's what your team is experts. The two of us are really good at, the high level stuff and being able to see the top line and ask questions and kind of coach people what their next steps are. But, in the end, we can talk about space, not new patient flow. We can talk about top line collections, but it's to the point where we would want to do the due diligence. I want to see tax returns, profit loss. I want to be able to ask the questions. And I know we've got this coming up, but just, who are the people that are going to help execute this as well.
So important.
They may have their own team. And if I'm talking to my buyers right now, they may have their own team and maybe we can help guide you, or they don't have a team at all. And maybe we can help guide the two of you through this process.
And we want them to have a team, right?
Yeah.
Because if
sure.
you are coming on board, it is a real awkward position for you as a buyer. And unfortunately, we get this a lot. It is an awkward position for you as a buyer. And if sellers, if you're listening, it's an awkward position to put a buyer or future partner or associate in of coming up with a plan for you to transition your practice and telling you what the cost is or the value is, right? It is a seller's job, if they're interested in bringing someone on, to go get evaluation, to understand what they're asking, to understand the structure of what they're offering, how much are they offering, what does that partnership look like, right? If you are unclear about that, right? To me, and I think we have an episode called Be a Leader, which is, I think, one of our more popular episodes, to go out and find a team, listen to this podcast, be educated about asset sale versus stock sale versus what type of partnership and what structure and how to split money. Like being educated on that. Kane Waters has an incredible practice transition seminar they put on twice. They also have a virtual one. Go and educate yourself on what that looks like, because it is very awkward for a buyer to have to put that together and say, hey, seller, here's what I'm offering, right? Because it's either super offensive intuitive or they don't know or it's not what they expected. And then now there's already kind of some conflict when there didn't need to be. So we love when a seller has a team already in place. We love if that team is dental practice partnership specific and already understands kind of the various structures. But what we would ask of a buyer, and so sellers, if you're listening, it's important to understand, I want to see the full year financials for whatever year we're in, right? So if I'm sitting here in August of 24, I want to see maybe through at least June of 24 financials. I want to see the full year of 23, both tax return and profit and loss. And then I want to see a production by provider report, which shows me the breakout of production. If you're the only doctor between you and hygiene, or you and other partners, or you or other associates in hygiene, or if you're orthodontic practice, I want to see production and case stats and contracts, right? And what I'm trying to understand is, what is this practice? Who's doing the production? What level of ownership are you offering? And does that make sense? How much money is there to split? And that's kind of first pass. But if you've had a call with us and you've given us that information and you've told us it's a partnership, you've likely heard me say, I kind of don't care what the price is. I kind of need to know what your partnership's going to do and how you're going to split money. Because ultimately, that's going to be the long-term impact that's going to either make you a winner or a loser.
Yeah, it could be $2 million practice, 40% overhead makes $1.2 million. In your mind, it's like, well, $1.2 million divided by 2 is 600,000. That sounds great, except they're only going to offer you 10% buy-in.
And they're only going to pay you some weird way where you actually only make exactly what you make as an associate, but then you have to pay debt.
Yeah, well, I'll pay you $100,000 salary and 10% profit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're my partner.
Yeah. Great.
And you'll be a 10% partner for 10 years. And then you get to buy 20%. It's just like...
Or my favorite, you will be a 50% partner. You're going to buy in 2.5% a year, but you're going to take on all the debt that I have currently. Yeah. And so then you're like, what? How does that even make sense? You know? And so I think it's just
makes sense for the seller.
100% does. These things also have to pass snuff with the bank, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if we are asking questions, it's because we've seen it play out and probably happen poorly, or we've seen it play out and that deal never gets done, or we've seen banks ask questions and then financially you can't make it happen even if you're willing to agree to some of those terms. And again, it's not that everything has to be exactly what we would want, right? Like there's several transitions I can think of where the transition is very much out of the box, not what we would have suggested in the first place, but it worked for buyer, worked for seller. Buyer was educated about what they were accepting, what they were giving, what they weren't getting, and what they were getting. It worked out for them, right?
Look, I would say this, go back to my point where let's get the visual of this thing, high level what the practice is doing, high level what it makes. I think we can do some of that, or you can go out to people to help understand that. But then after that, you want the same kind of visual, the framework, how it's going to work. And then once we can understand it's going to be a partnership, once it's going to understand that we get paid this way, once we understand that be 50-50, and this is where the profits would look like, then the due diligence could be, how does this actually work? Right. So then I think that's a good segue into, kind of some differences of how people kind of put these transactions together. Obviously, we're biased here. We have our processes that we do that I would call it more of a simpler model when we're not going to go the Kane Waters route. Kane Waters route's got a little bit more detail to how some of the splits are done. I don't want to set it up like that and then be dealing with questions 3 months from now when you're not using Kane Waters accounting department to split it. But maybe just give a high level breakdown or maybe difference between, 2 ways maybe you could create a partnership.
Yeah. So, I think from a partnership and how we split money, I will tell clients there's a million ways to do it. And none of them are wrong, right? You can get as simple or as complicated as you want. And I think it's important that you look at how you operate, how you and your partner produce, what you're doing versus your partner, and how your practices run. And in our opinion, pick one of the more simple ways you can do that, right? If you are both just doing simple bread and butter, you both do the same amount, you're both the same age, like all the things, right? Like you could probably split money in a very simple way. Like you both make X percentage of what you produce, and then you split the rest by ownership, right? If one of you does implants and the other doesn't, right? Well, now we have this weird cost structure difference, right? So now maybe we have to split supplies differently. If one of you's really young and one of you's older and slowing down, and so now I'm going to be speeding up and you're going to be slowing down, well, then maybe that cost split doesn't make as much sense. Maybe now we need to add some other parameters of maybe one person's handling more admin than the other, right? So understanding kind of how your partnership is going to run can impact how you split money. As you mentioned, the Kane Waters methodology, because of the various types of partnerships and the long-term nature of a lot of them, they have a more complicated way that they split money, but they also have the accounting support that helps calculate that. If your local CPA is going to mess that up and not be able to do something that's complicated with a bunch of Excel formulas, you don't want to have to fix that. And you don't
Right.
want it to be wrong. And if you don't need that and you don't want that, well, then make the choice, right? But if you do need that, then you need to understand what that looks like. How is it calculated? And you need to be part of that process.
I mean, think of it this way. It's a $3 million business. For simplicity, it's a 50% overhead. So it's $1.5 million to be distributed between two people. So in one model, you could just say, let's just do it simple because it's easy. And the other model, it's let's make it more complicated. But there needs to be complexity for a reason because we're splitting $3 million or splitting $1.5 million of profit. And just like you said, there could be differences in supply costs and implants. There could be differences. I've got 2 assistants, you've got 3. There could be differences in my production of how I may be doing more because maybe just from my experience. It could be aligner cases that you're doing. It could be, I don't know, it could be an example of I've got all fee-for-service patients and you've got PPO plan that you're a part of. There's so many different uniquenesses about dentistry and how you could do it and split. Just know that no matter if you go simple, it's perfectly fine. I'll give you a heads up. It will get complicated and there will be a problem. And therefore, that's why you need the additional complexities of how to split it. And that's exactly why the accounting department splits money for 1,000 plus dentists in these partnerships. Because they want it. They want it down to that's not fair, that's not fair, that's not. If you look at it, you're going to find a reason that that person is taking advantage of you until there's a third party that's doing it and going, no, that's fair.
Yeah. And I mean, I think too, like understanding that most of what we're talking about is how you split expenses, right?
Expenses,
And
correct.
so if you're a new partnership, like there's always give and take, right? It's never 50-50 in a marriage. Someone's always going to be doing this and you're doing that. So understanding what you're running through the practice, what you're expensing, what you're not expensing, what you're using, and just having conversations about that as partners is clearly very important. But regardless of what it is, you should always get paid for what you do. And then there should be a component that's based on ownership, right? I mean, oftentimes that's the hygiene pool. If you don't have a hygiene pool, there's oftentimes other ways you can kind of create that. But every partnership split income-wise should have a component that is tied to what you do. You produce more, you get more, right? When I see partnership agreements that come to us and they're like, we're just going to each take a salary and then we're going to split the rest based on ownership. Great. You're all happy right now. Everyone's producing the same right now, but there will come a point when one of you will start producing more, the other will slow down, and the person who's producing more is going to be resentful, right? And what we're trying to do in creating this is to remove the future potential for resentment or inequality that we know ultimately in a long-term partnership will show up.
The only example I can tell you that makes sense, that's like easy to say it's fair, is orthodontics. If it's a $3 million practice, I work 4 days, you work 4 days, and we literally share every patient. I have no problem with essentially paying you $300, me $300, whatever the profit is, we can split. It's actually not complicated. It's just extremely rare, especially if I'm doing more align cases and I'm actually working 3.5 days, or I'm not as busy, don't see as many patients.
Or I've seen this, because I agree with you, right? Like that's usually the case, but I can see the same number of patients and start the same number of cases in 2 days as my young new partner who takes 4 days. So why do I get paid less for my 2 days, because it's a per diem model, than my 4 days, right? So then it becomes
then I make the argument too that we have to think and talk about that. But I'd also say if you're not in the office, you're not managing this $3 million operation.
There you go.
So we've got to figure out something what's fair on the management side, right?
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for me, the 4-day week associate that quote unquote is slower, you wouldn't be working 2 days. Because I'm pretty sure when I got here, you were working 4 days.
That's true.
So you got to see it from both sides. And sure, maybe we try to figure that out and there's a little bit more to the person that works the 4 days, but I can tackle that.
The good of the overall practice. That's what we're always trying to go for.
Big picture, Christy. Keep your eye on the big picture.
Big picture. The next topic, which we're actually going to have a whole nother episode.
This episode's so good that this topic needs another episode.
Yes.
What's that?
How are practices valued and when are they valued? And we have touched on this in episode 32, way back when we were younger and sprier and better, maybe
brown
not.
Hair.
But we touched on this in episode 32, but we're going to do a whole new episode on 116, I think is the number. And we're going to talk about this big picture. But here, what I want to comment on here is that understanding if you're an associate who's going to be in the practice and the intent is partnership, are you valuing it today? Are you valuing it in 12 months, 18 months, 1 month before you start? When is the practice being valued, right? We could make arguments for all of those dates I just mentioned. The first thing to know is when, and then to also understand if I buy more, what is that value in the future? right? And we have opinions on that and thoughts, and have seen it probably every way under the sun. But those are important things to talk about, and that should be addressed early in a partnership discussion.
Yeah, just prepping for that, I just came up with like 7, 8 examples, and I know you'll add and comment about each one of them, but it's just like you can just think about all these scenarios of how a practice may value this way or that way, or the timing of, you mentioned associate coming in now, and there's building issues, there's equipment issues. So we'll talk about it, and even different specialties as well. So yeah, that's going to be fun. So definitely stay tuned for that.
And then finally, I think this is a good place for us to wrap up. But I think understanding that over the course of episode 114 and this episode, I think what you hopefully have gathered is that there's not A plus B plus C formula for partnerships. There's a lot of things to consider. There's a lot of dynamics that make your personal situation and then the partnership or practice that you're joining make it unique, and it's not one size fits all. And so there's a lot of different moving pieces here, and both the seller having a team, you having a team, and the right transition folks in place will help mitigate and make sure that you have captured all those pieces. Because if buying into a single practice, 100% practice is difficult, buying into a partnership is triple complication. And so having that team in place like NDP, and having the seller have a good team, having a good attorney who understands dental partnerships, having a good lender who understands the dynamic and the relationship there, all those things are just critical to the success of it.
Well, look, I agree with you. It's definitely more complicated on the front end. It's more probably complicated during the process being in a partner. But I love partnerships.
Yeah.
I think that the 3, the 4, the 5 doctors in their practice, they bring unique skill sets. Ideally, you're in one location. Ideally, you're big top line. Ideally, that we've got low fixed costs. And ideally, you're more profitable. Ideally, there's a model to transition in and out. Ideally, when you think about it, big picture, we're talking about building wealth, you want time. And so when you have partners, you have that flexibility for time. So I like the partnership. I know that many of our young doctors want and leaning towards that as kind of a first option when they compare it to just, doing something on their own. So I like it. I just think that you need to be a little bit more prepared and ask all the right questions. Have a good team around you, or the two of you together, to make it successful.
Absolutely. Good content, sir.
Yes.
I like it. All right, team. That's all we have for today. Thanks for joining us on episode 115 of Transition Talk. As always, make sure to share the transition love with those who may not know of us yet. And of course, subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, friends.
Thanks, guys.